Hello there, Michelle Short here for My Favourite Things. Today I have a sweet little birds of a feather scene to share with you. So let's get started. These are the two dynamics set that I'm going to be using today. It's the Heartfelt Fence dynamics on the right hand side and the birds of a feather dynamics on the left. I have already cut my elements out of MFT cardstock purely because I wanted to get ahead. It did take me a little while to die cut them all out, but we're going to assemble them a little bit later. First of all, I'm going to work on my background piece. So I have a panel of white cardstock that's cut to 3.5 inches by 4 3/4 inches, and I want to add some sky and ground onto this panel. So I'm taking some Twisted Citron Distress ink to start with, and I'm adding in what's going to kind of look like grass at the bottom of my scene here. As you can see, I do work in layers with distress ink. I would rather add too little and build up the colour rather than add too much to start with, and I feel that I get a nicer blend doing it in this way as well. So I do bring in that fence die cut a couple of times just so that I can see what it's going to look like. You're not going to see a huge amount of this colour at the bottom, but it is just going to kind of peek through that fence and it is going to look kind of like grass. So I wanted it to be a little bit darker at the bottom, so I'm going in with Mode Lawn Distress ink and again working in layers just so that I can blend that up. Just adding a little bit more just right at the bottom there, just to darken that area up. I then want to add in the sky, and for that I'm going to use the Mini Cloud Edges stencil, and with that fence die cut in place, I'm just going to place this over the panel so that I can see where I want my first cloud to be. Ordinarily, when I do ink blending with clouds, I do work at the top and work my way down, but in this instance I wanted to figure out exactly where I wanted that first cloud to be, where it would be above the top of the fence. So I'm going to go in the opposite direction, but I am only adding 2 clouds in here, so it didn't make too much of a difference. I'm using Mermaid Lagoon Distress ink for this, and I'm just going over that top area of that cloud there, kind of blending up to white. And then I can just move that stencil, and what I love about these stencils is you've got so many different cloud formations that you can add. You can flip the stencil over and you've got another 4 as well, which is great. So I'm just taking 2 of those sides and just blending on that ink there at the top. And this one especially, I do really want that to kind of blend into white. I thought about adding the clouds all the way to the top of the panel, but I really just wanted to focus that scene towards the bottom. I'm then adding some On Point Precision Glue onto the back of my first die cut fence here. So this is the Heartfelt Fence, and I am going to layer them up so that I get a bit of dimension without having to add foam tape onto the back of them. So I'm just adding small dabs of that On Point Precision Glue onto the back of the fence. I'm not adding it completely over the entire thing, but where I think that I need that glue. I am then just going to grab a scrap piece of paper and I'm just going to dab off the excess glue onto the paper, and then I can add that onto my panel here. And I just want to make sure that the fence is kind of going to be as central as possible at the bottom of that panel. I want it so that on each end there's going to be a little bit of the fence kind of popping out. So once I've got the placement where I want it to, I can just press down onto that panel, and then I'm going to flip the panel over and then cut off the excess with scissors. Like I said, I am going to add a couple of layers onto this, and I would rather cut off the layers one at a time, because once it gets so thick it's quite difficult to cut that with scissors. So this is my second die cut here, again just adding some little dabs of On Point Precision Glue, and then I can just line that up on top of the other one. Again just cutting off the excess from the back. And then in the Heartfelt Fence dynamics, you actually get individual pieces of the fence as well, which is really cool. So I've cut some of those again from white cardstock, and I'm just going to add those on top, and that's going to give even more dimension to the fence. So I'm just adding lines of that glue, and then I can add those pieces on top. And I really love it because you've got that little kind of heart detail in the top of the fence pieces, and then it does also add kind of like indentations as well, which I think is really lovely. It kind of just gives like a homely feel. So for the two edge pieces, I'm going to stick those down, but I'm just going to leave that glue to dry completely before I cut off the excess. So this is the Birds of a Feather Dynamics, and you've got the bird wings, you've got the bird bodies, you've got legs, you've got flowers and the inside of flowers, you've got their eyes, you've got a piece that they can kind of perch onto, which is really cute. You've got leaves, and then hearts, and then the bellies of the birds, and you've got an envelope there as well. I love this set, so cute to make lots of different scenes with. So I've cut all of my pieces out. For the birds themselves, I'm using boysenberry, grape jelly and grapesicle cardstock. At this point, I wasn't 100% sure which belly coordinated with this bird body, and so I'm just figuring out here which one it actually is, and it is this one that I've picked up here. So I'm just going to remove the other belly, and I'm going to add some On Point Precision glue onto the back of these pieces. Anytime that I move the pieces off the screen, that's me just dabbing off the excess glue on a scrap piece of paper. I really love that you can create these birds in lots of different ways. Although there is kind of like separate parts like the bellies, the wings and things like that, you can add some of them and you don't have to add the others. Like you don't have to have the bellies on them. The smaller bird doesn't actually have a belly. And obviously you can do these in so many different colours. I found it really therapeutic just kind of sitting and adding all of these different layers together. The only thing I will say is that I found it a little bit more difficult on camera rather than in person, just because a lot of the pieces are so tiny. I did assemble the eyes off screen just because I knew that they'd be so tiny and my head would just completely get in the way. So for these leg pieces, I cut those from craft cardstock, and the idea is that because you've got kind of like a bit at the top, you can add that onto the back of the birds, which is really helpful. Unfortunately, I managed to drop the bird, as you saw, but thankfully this glue does dry clear, and I managed to kind of get rid of most of the excess, and I don't think you can notice that in the end. And similar to what the legs are, the beaks are the same, so you've got extra long pieces, which is really helpful, so that you can kind of add the glue on top and then add the bird to the beak, if that makes sense, rather than adding the beak to the bird. I find that quite helpful. I found it absolutely fine just to add that with the liquid glue, but you could add a little bit of tape or something like that onto the back of the bird if you wanted to, but this glue is really quite secure, so I didn't feel that I needed to. So for this one, again, I'm just going to do the same thing with those legs, add the glue on the top piece there, and then I can add the bird onto the legs. And like I say, this one here doesn't actually have a belly, and probably just because it's so tiny, but they're just absolutely adorable. I just think they're so cute, and they'd be lovely kind of like in rainbow colours as well, I think. So I'm just adding that beak onto that little bird, and as you can see here, they are just absolutely adorable. So next, now that glue has dried on the two outer edges of the fence, I'm just cutting that down, and then I'm adding some foam tape onto the back of that panel, and I'm adhering that down onto an A2 sized card base. So that's a finished size of 4¼ inches by 5½ inches. I'm just working out where I want my birds to be placed on the panel, and then I can add some small little pieces of foam tape onto the back of those. I'm not adding it onto the legs or anything because they're going to overlap onto the fence, and the fence is already popped up, so I didn't feel like I needed to. So I'm just going to place that so that the birds are going to sit on the top of that fence. Like I said, I think you can create loads of different scenes with all of these different elements. You can have them flying, you don't have to put the legs on or anything like that. And for loads of different occasions as well, like birthdays or anniversaries, like love, anything like that. I just think they're so cute. Next, I've cut the flowers from the Birds of a Feather set, and for that I used ripe raspberry cardstock and summer splash cardstock. And then here I decided that I wanted to add a little bit of ink blending onto the leaves, so I added a piece of temporary tape runner there onto that scrap bit of paper. That's just to hold them in place, and then I can add that Mowed Lawn Distress ink just towards the bottom of these leaves. So these leaves are cut from Sour Apple cardstock, and it's just going to give a nice gradient just towards the bottom of those leaves. I didn't think that the flowers really needed it, and to be honest I could have got away with not doing it with the leaves either, but I did find that I quite liked the end look. So again, I decided to drop that on my card base. Thankfully it dropped upside down with the glue facing upwards, but later on I do drop a flower on it with the glue facing downwards. It was just one of those days, never mind. So I'm just adding those leaves in. I'm going to kind of pop them underneath the flowers. So again, I'm just using that On Point precision glue and then placing them down. And like I said, I just enjoy the process of kind of creating little scenes with the die cuts. I know sometimes it can take a little while compared to stamping or something like that, but yeah, I really do enjoy the process. So I'm just adding those other leaves there on the right hand side, and then I can add that pink flower on top, and then I can just add that last leaf there at the top as well. And then I thought about adding another leaf underneath this one, but I decided not to in the end. I thought it looked okay as is. And that's where I dropped that one. But again, thank goodness that glue dries clear and I managed to kind of wipe it off quickly. So I did create a sentiment off screen. I used the Tweet Greetings stamp set, and I heat embossed that onto black cardstock and just cut that out into a strip. I thought the Just a Note sentiment worked quite well for lots of different occasions. You could still kind of send it as a birthday card or something like that, but there is loads of different sentiments in that set. It's a really great set that kind of has some punny sentiments and things like that as well. So I'm just using my T-square ruler here just to make sure that I'm going to add it on straight. I wasn't 100% sure where I was going to add it, so I like to kind of hover it over, and then once I'm happy I can press down. And then I'm going to add some yellow enamel dots into the centres of the flowers. There are die cut pieces that you can add inside, but I wanted a little bit of dimension just on the insides of those flowers, so I'm using those enamel dots instead. So I can just finish up with that last one here at the bottom. And then to finish off my card, I'm just going to add some white highlights onto the birds, just using a white gel pen. And that is the card finished for today. There is quite a lot of dimension on the card, but it's still fairly flat for mailing, which is quite helpful. And it's just quite a kind of clean and simple scene, kind of focusing most of the scene at the bottom of the card. Links to the products that I used will be linked in the description bar here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.